this book may make an impact on its readers, making India and the world a more democratic space, which gives equal space, equal opportunity, and equal value to all people.
A very good evening to everyone present here. It's very good to see everyone again. I am Sumadhura Roy, and I am currently pursuing my PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and I'm also teaching at the Dayal Singh Evening College. I'm also one of the authors for this volume. As you all have gathered here today for the release of the book, Reading the Margins, History, Culture, Literature, a book that is a labor of love of all the authors, especially our editor, Dr. Prabhakar Palaka. We had all come together for an intellectually stimulating conference in 2017. And this book is the outcome of the exchange of ideas which took place in that space. I extend my warm welcome to our publisher, People's Literature Publication, to all our authors, our editor, and all of you participants who have joined us today in this celebratory occasion. I would now like to invite Dr. Prabhakar Palaka, the editor of this volume, for the welcome address. Dr. Palaka teaches English at Swami Shraddhanath College, University of Delhi. He completed his master's and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he has been engaged in working and writing on the issues of marginality. He has published several articles in reputed research journals and is the author of the book Politics of Writing, a study of Dalits in Oriya literature. He has also participated and presented his papers at various national and international seminars. Over to you, Dr. Palaka.
Thank you, Sumadhura. What a joy to see this book, coming out and seeing the light of the day. Especially, nothing great, good news can come during the pandemic, especially when everything is locked down. Such a productive work that has come out, and I'm really, really excited and happy about it. As Sumadhura has rightly said, there has been a long, long journey, that has gone into making this book what it is today. And it is not a lonely journey though. A lot of people, good people who came alongside and made this journey a wonderful one. And especially, it was a nice occasion to have a conference in collaboration with the Department of English, especially Professor Crystal and Professor Rajkumar. They were so kind enough. And yes, Professor Rajkumar. And there were people like, Professor Patrick, Sunani, and Jijay Prasad, who were part of this entire journey. They came alongside till the end, and till today I see them. So I really feel so happy, and my heart is filled with gratitude to them. I think, of course, many people participated, great intellectuals. But the other day I was talking to Professor Rajkumar. He also said that, many organize good seminars, but hardly anyone, publishing good book, later on. So that is the kind of challenge that that was there. And so he was also really happy about this publication. And talking about, and this book has also good endorses by, Sharan Kumar Limbale, a very renowned writer, and Dr. Basudev Sunani, and also Professor Patrick, and yes, Professor Rajkumar himself, Professor Rajkumar has also contributed a chapter to it and endorsing, and also readily agreed to become the discussant for today. Of course, all other authors, their I think collective effort, and I was again and again I was, returning to them and talking to them and how they can, so all those things have happened behind, what we see today. So I'm so happy about that. And the second thing is, of course, during this pandemic, friendship between Vivek and me was simply great. Almost every day we were talking, and so it became really very productive. And I was not into depression at all. When during pandemic, many people have gone into depression, but it was a very engaging time for me and very productive. And definitely, I think, People's Literature publication has made my time very, very productive at the same time for all of us. And I thank People's Literature publication, Vivek ji, for working, and the design and everything was so great. And now, coming to the book, you can see it has around 15 chapters, and in introduction, and also forward by Professor Jijit Prasad. And I would definitely mention all the authors. I have already named a few. Of course, Saroj Mahanand is one, and today he is one of the discussants. And apart from them, of course, Professor Patrick is here with us, joining all the way from Australia. Thank you for that. And, Dr. Rajesh, Bandana, and Sumadhura herself, who is the, comparer today. And, Pradyumna, Ameshwar, Robert, Grace, Achinglu, Narendra, and, Pankaj Lakhera, Ninu, and Shweta, And talking about the book, I'm not spending much time in the formalities, so I want to come to the book. If you see, it is well grounded in a theory of marginalities or margins, and also one would see that it is well substantiated in the context. You would see the theoretical aspect. If you see, first 5 chapters are based on the theory, theory of margins and marginal studies, and well framed, and then you would have, I think, various issues on that. Then the next 3 chapters are on Dalits, as margins, and then you have next 4 chapters, which are well concerted on tribal issues in general, and also religious minorities. And then the 13th chapter, of course, we have just 1 chapter that was on disability, but it is a powerful chapter, I would say, by Pankaj Lakhera. Then 14th and 15th chapter, we have also tried to incorporate the 3rd gender and LGBT issue. So that way, really, this book is really, replete with the theory and the practical aspect of the marginal studies. So, and when we talk about the day today, on the day when we are releasing the book and having a discussion, especially at a time when our nation and the society in our country is going through tough times. Just yesterday and day before, what has happened in the country has really shocked our nation. That is what is about the margins and the issue of marginality. And during the lockdown, as you see, I have dedicated this book to the people who were still further marginalized during this COVID-19. So how this study of marginality and the issue of marginality is very core to me and to all of us. I believe that. That's why this good work has come out. But then the issue still remains, how long the margin still remain in the margin or still marginalized. As and when you see that center forging towards the, margin forging towards the center, you see that there is so much of resistance and trying to push them to the corners. So that is where how we locate this particular book, Reading the Margin, and definitely we believe, and this is an attempt to create a space, a democratic space for the margins or the marginality, the issue of marginality itself. And I believe a lot of things will come up during the time of discussion. So I would and we still dream by through this kind of books in time like this can be a kind of intervention, right intervention when we talk about that we need to create a space for the margins. Otherwise, I think a society will continue to remain and will I think suffer in inequality. So I would end with Professor Prasad's, who has been so kind to write the foreword. The ending line, I would just quote him, and I think I'll end my introduction. So Professor Prasad says, "This book may make an impact on its readers, making India and world a more democratic space, which gives equal space, equal opportunity, and equal value to all people." And once again, I welcome all of you. I think Professor Prasad also has joined, and I welcome him too. And all of you, thank you for being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words and for contextualizing the book and how it is important because it's releasing in this time when there is so much turmoil around us. So today we are also pleased to have with us Professor Patrick Danaher, who joined us for the book release all the way from Australia. He is the Professor of Educational Research in the School of Education in the University of Southern Queensland, Australia, and currently docent in social justice and education at the University of Helsinki, Finland. He is also one of the contributing authors in this book. So let us move on to we have a lot of eminent scholars and speakers with us today. Professor Rajkumar is here with us. He teaches in the Department of English, University of Delhi. He has worked in the areas of Dalit literature, Indian writing in English, and translation. His published works include Dalit personal narratives, Reading Caste, Nation and Identity, and an English translation of Akhila Nayak's Veda and Dalit literature and criticism. Now, I would like to invite Professor Rajkumar to kindly grace the occasion and enlighten us with his address on interrogating the margins. Due to limited time, I request Professor Rajkumar to kindly note that he has 10 minutes to address the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Samudra. I'll be, I'll keep 10 minutes. So good evening to everyone. First of all, congratulations, Dr. Prabhakar Palka, for having nicely edited this book. As you have already mentioned, I was, when you propose for the editing of the book, I was apprehensive because whenever there is any seminar or conference, a book never comes out, but you utilize the pandemic very, that nicely and rightly. So congratulations. Congratulations also to the publisher because perhaps this is the first initiative. I don't know, that people's literature publication I had never heard about. It has come very nicely. So also congratulations to the publisher. Now let me quickly talk about, I would like to talk about 2-3 things, that majorly about the idea of the margin. So the title that Prabhakar wanted to have, interrogating the margins. Why do we need the margins? There are several margins, as we all know. So what I will do in my next 5 to 8 minutes, I'll talk little about the theoretical and philosophical aspect of the margins. And then maybe, that if possible, I'll try to come out with the way, as we all know, that we don't need margins, because in order to have a just and equal society, we need to emphasize on the idea of equality, justice, social, economic, political, and that the idea of fraternity. Because first, let me talk about that there are 3 different aspects of the book, as we all know: history, culture, and literature, by reading the margins. And as Prabhakar has already summarized, that out of 15 chapters, there are at least 4 or 5 different categories of margins. So one is caste, of course, having Dalit in the central, centrally located. The second is, of course, gender, and that includes also actually women from Northeast. That is very interesting, as Prabhakar has already pointed out, religious minority. That. So that combines, that the complexity of being not only just gender, but also certain, that kind of gendering of, that say Northeastern religious minority is very different from the gender we understand about. So there are lots and lots of complexities understanding this concept. The third aspect, of course, is disability, and the fourth, of course, is sexual minority. I can, that use the word while talking about LGBTQ+. So in a way, this book talks about several margins and several marginalities. Now, this is a good thing, at least, that a good initiative to document the voices of, that marginal position. And as we all know, the margins exist because there is power politics. This is what, that philosophical framework in which we know about Foucault. Michael Foucault talks about, that power invested in the center. So knowledge is the domain, knowledge power, that nexus is there. And as long as power is being enjoyed by maybe, that the center or centers, they will not let power go from their hand. And that's where there are, that the necessary of the margins. In other words, the margins always try to not only, that say produce, perhaps, that will give you example from India particularly, because even though we are talking about the theoretical and philosophical framework in which the center and periphery, that work throughout the world, but in Indian context, look at Indian society, that caste is one framework where power exists among only 15 persons, that upper caste class, the elites, that. And that's where the knowledge is their domain. So as long as the power exists, the subservient position, and that's where the margin, the idea of making other people work for them. So 85% people, as Phule has already talked about, that Bahujan, the majority of India, are the producers. I always ask about who produces, that say grains in India, who make roads in India, who make railways in India, who make flyovers, who make metro, but who enjoy, that. And the irony in India is that because of course, conglomeration of caste, class, religious, maybe, that condition, gender, ethnicity, that because we should not forget the idea of ethnicity and disability, and of course, sexual minority. All this, that say combinedly, the margins, what they finally have to perhaps, that find in a location whereby they are not just marginal, they also always find difficulty to exercise their power. Because, the power is the center of the whole idea of, that being political, etc., etc. Now, this book captures very nicely about, because we also, that read from the critical discourse what, that a book like this has done, because we have already, we know about beginning from the mid-19th century in India. I must try to trace, because we are also talking about history, culture, and literature, that say today, we are talking freely about, that marginal studies or marginal discourse. That is because of the foundation laid by people like Phule, Ambedkar, Narayana Guru, Periyar, Achyutanand, and much people, of course, if you go to middle, that time, medieval time, say, I will quote about the idea of Kabir, who talks about Prem Nagari. The idea of, that where there is justice and peace, there are no communal divide, what we see in India today. Ravi Das, if you have heard about, I'm sure many of you have read about, talks about Begumpura, where there is no caste, no class, no gender discrimination. And of course, Ambedkar talked about Prabuddha Bharat, the enlightened India. And when we talk about enlightened, actually, it is the real sense of the term whereby liberty, equality, and fraternity exist. But as we all know, the problem is that India is a caste society, and caste divides people, and it is very difficult to have not only, that say there is no idea of equality, because people are put in such a level that there will be low and high. Also, that gender, the idea of, that patriarchy, and it is always believed, because we are also talking about history, it seems, that caste and patriarchy emerged in India almost at the same time. And that's why the 220, according to my research, 220 Dharma Shastra that we find today, Hindu caste law, basically are the law books to deny equal human rights to the low caste and women of all communities. So when we talk about rewriting history, today Dalit study, tribal study, women's study, queer study, for example, they are rewriting India's history, India's culture, India's literature in a big way. Since there is no time, maybe, that I can quote from 2 or 3 critical essays, that is, these are included here. Say, that how, for example, the idea of, while talking about history, say, how, that people like Kalyan Rao, a Dalit writer, talks about, where is my history? Where is my, the ancestors' history? There is no Dalit history in India. That the history book that you read till date, Dalit have no place, that in India's history. And that's why Dalit have to rewrite history. Now there are many attempts made by not only professional historians, also literary historiography are being written. Say, that in this book, there is one, at least Bandhana's efforts, that Bandhana has referred to the way by writing Dalit literature, also, the Dalit writers are writing literary historiography. Saroj Mahanand, of course, had a nice, that seminar where, again, that he came out, he brought out a book where he talks about the Dalit historiography. Today, Bikram Harijan, if you have heard about, or Chinna Rao in GNU, they are rewriting India's history from the Dalit perspective. Now, the second is culture. I just wanted to, that refer to that look at, that how culture is being rewritten in Indian context, and particularly in this book, writers like Pradyumna Bar, I just refer to, that one maybe essay where he talks about the idea of language, Dome language. Dome happens to be a Dalit community towards, meaning across Odisha, but western part of Odisha, because he also comes from Kalahandi region. Now, talking in Dome language is a shame, that people are ashamed of talking about Dalit language. But thanks for Dalit literature today. Say you read any number of books, that whether Bama, that Bama, Sharan Kumar Limbali, Om Prakash Valmiki, or many others, that in Indian context or even in Odisha context, if people have heard about the Sanjay Bagh, Vasudev Sunani, or Kilna, Dalit writers, both in Odisha as well as in India, they are incorporating these, that community language in literature. So Pradyumna's Bagh, that idea, he nicely concludes. Of course, he complicates by saying that being middle class Dalit, that not talking in the Dome language is, that is an escape, because one has to, of course, hide one's identity. The day I hit my car, that is the first Dalit, short story anthology by Baburam Bagul. Baburam Bagul, that. So, that if suppose people are writing from, that this perspective, using Dalit language, and that is becoming a part of what is called mainstream, literature. I remember, that how, Bama's Karupku is being written in everyday language of the people. So this is one way to assert one culture. There are also other ways. That say Om Prakash Valmiki, by giving an F title to his autobiographical Jhutan, talks about the cultural past of the Dalit community. Some of the writing that which are included in this text is rewriting India's culture in a big way. Meaning, I can give you more examples like Sharan Kumar Limbale's autobiographical Akarmasi, which is also a cultural, that past of, that being upper caste, meaning people can anyway, that enjoy Dalit women. What, the Pravakar reminded us about the incident that shook the nation actually is just a kind of, that as if it is the cause that matters, not the crime. Yeah, the way, that criminals are being, that being kept, that under the, that umbrella of the politicians. So this is where, that we are talking about 21st century, we are talking about equality, justice, but at the same time, that look at how caste persists in everyday life. So Manu, that Manu actually, that Manu has not disappeared yet. Every nook and corner you will find Manu waiting anxiously to assert, that the caste mark. Now, the last maybe, that I'll talk about, because Sumathura, you have to remind me about time, because I'm little, that uncertain about, that the way. So, what I, that finally want to talk about is, the idea of myth, the way myth are being, that it is not just Dalit writers. Say one article that that talks also about the way Saroj Mohanand talks about focalization of the Ramayana. No, focalization of Ramayana through that the way Aldar Nag, a very that not known, to completely unknown person, living in a village in western part of Odisha and trying to, that sing Ramayana, the Ramayana, and he talks about, of course, Sarat Mahanand talks about, he equates with Sudra Kavi, Sarala Das, who initiated rewriting Ramayana and Mahabharata in plebeian language in mid 15th century, actually. That. So what Haldar Nag is doing, as Saroj Mahanand in his article Focalization of the Ramayana. So these are many ways, that this book intervenes, as Prabhakar used the word, really intervenes the way margins have to be understood. Now, I just, that quote two books by Robert Chambers. That why this book is so important, because it not only intervenes the very, that idea of marginality, but by, that getting it published and discussing here at, that crucial time, what it, that does is, it not only gives example from various, that various field, like really a truly interdisciplinary, study, because there are not only, that literary, but also social scientists, language experts, gender, disability, and third gender, as we all know. So really, truly interdisciplinary. So the last point that just I wanted to talk about is, that if at all, today we are, that teaching, say, the marginal discourse in colleges and university, definitely a book like this will help us in a big way. So I will conclude maybe, that by saying that it is not just simply the presence of the book that is important, but what Paulo Freire, that a Brazilian philosopher long back talked about, that education will not only give us a job, that also it will bring critical consciousness, the idea of, that probing, looking into. No, so this book, that will definitely go a long way to not only interrogate what is called the status quo of the center, but long back we also, that heard from Ambedkar, educate, agitate, and organize. No, because finally it is not the ideas. Ideas matters, of course, because as we all know that ideas is the prime location whereby we can take a debate or discussion further. But what is most important is praxis, action. No, the whole idea of, that intervening in the matter of society, culture, and that literature. And this is where, that only when there is action, perhaps there is liberation. The idea of, that everyone, that feels equal is not very important, to be treated equally. So, that finally I will end off by endorsing the whole idea of, that how every discussion, of course, is welcome. But as Ambedkar, I'll just, that conclude with the quote from Ambedkar, that philosophers have come and gone. Philosophers have come and gone. But the challenge is how to change the world. So thank you so much for your patient listening. Thanks.
Thank you, Rajkumar sir, for this engaging discussion. I would now like to invite Professor Danaher to please officially announce the release of the book and share a few words with us. Is Professor Danaher here? Yes.
I'm here. Thanks so much. Hello. My apologies, everyone. I was dreading the moment that that you would announce me, because I could see that my Zoom had frozen, and so my sincere apologies. Anyway, thanks so much, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here. if I can just share a few reflections, if I may, of the conference, because I think that they parallel the book, and the previous speakers have picked up on a number of these points. So just very quickly, I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Prabhakar at a conference we attended in Thailand a couple of years before this conference. And so that was a delight, and I learned a great deal from his presentation. And then when he kindly invited me to this conference, that was fantastic. It's a testament to his patience and goodwill. The plane from Singapore was delayed several hours, and so I got into Delhi quite late at night, as I recall. So, and he was there calmly waiting and so on. So that was brilliant. In terms of the conference, what I remember is a couple of things. First of all, I remember the intellectual energy of the conference. I came back to Australia armed with new concepts, new language, new analytical frameworks that I've used with my doctoral students in particular and my colleagues. I learned so much about different manifestations of power, of marginality, of resistance, of transformation from that conference. And that is replete's not the right word, that runs through the book as well, and that's absolutely terrific. And in terms of that, that is one of the many ways that the book speaks obviously to India, but it also speaks outside the borders of India. It speaks directly to Australia, for instance, because when Dr. Prabhakar was speaking at the beginning, many of those issues apply, obviously in different ways, to Indigenous Australians, but also to refugees in Australia and many other markers of poverty and so on. And so there's a real resonance. The other thing that I remember from the conference, at the end of the conference, as I recall, it was early evening, and the happiness and joy and peace that I felt at the end of the conference when we all mingled outside on the lawns. And I took away a sense we'd done intellectual hard labor. We had worked, as we should work, hard at the conference. We'd exchanged ideas and so on. And then that was a time to celebrate. So I took that back to Australia. So it's no exaggeration, if I might say, that that conference was transformational for me at a personal level. And then in terms of the ripple effects of talking about it and about the book with many of my students. So I shared my chapter in the book, but also the table of contents with a very astute doctoral student here. And she found that absolutely fascinating, not least because it links with her current theorizing around third space. And so a very different context, but applying these really powerful concepts and theories to examine current contemporary issues and so on. The other, as I was listening to the speakers, the other concept that comes through the book, at least from my perspective, is that of robust hope. So as we know, we encounter these challenges every day. And sometimes, depending on how we feel and so on, we can feel overwhelmed and basically to say, it's all too difficult, I won't engage anymore. But what I took away from the conference and from the book is that notion, not of, in terms of robust hope, it's not Pollyanna-ish, it's not jumping up and saying, it'll be fine, we can get through. That's foolish. But if hope is armed with and informed by good theory, good praxis, as Professor Kumar was saying, and good intentions, goodwill, as he also said, we can indeed change the world. So on that note, I'm delighted and very privileged officially to declare this wonderful book released. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, sir. May I please request all the authors now to hold the book in front of them to mark this occasion?
Reading the margins.
Yes.
I don't have the book.
Wow, congratulations to all.
Congratulations to all the authors for the official release of this book.
Everybody shall get a copy.
I would like to take this opportunity to also welcome Professor GJV Prasad, who is here with us today. And he has been with us in this journey from the very beginning, like Dr. Palaka pointed out. And so Professor GJV Prasad is a professor at the Department of English at JNU, and he has, to his credit, 13 book publications and over 40 research articles. And we are indebted to him for his constant support, encouragement, and motivation. He has also written the foreword to this book, so we request him to kindly share a few words with us.
Sorry, I didn't expect that at all. I'm at my dining table drinking tea, so I don't have a nice background. Just to say, since I've asked, and since you've been so kind to ask, and Prabhakar has always been very nice to me, and I have to repay his kindness in some form. If it's just to say a few words about the book, I'm very happy. This is such a wonderful journey from that conference to the book that Prabhakar has undertaken. And as Rajkumar said earlier, very often conferences don't end up result in books in India. So it's good to see the effort being taken, to see the wonderful energy of the conference being expressed in a book, which will have a long shelf life, I'm certain, and which will be read by various scholars in the field for a very long time. So I must simply congratulate Prabhakar for this wonderful effort, for this book that he has brought out, and for the conference that he organized. And I must say that I wish the book all the best in its journey through the world from now on, now that the book is officially launched. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. With pleasure now, I invite Professor Saroj Kumar Mahananda, who teaches in the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, to address all of us on the significance of the book Reading the Margins. He is a multilingual writer, translator, and critic. Besides many scholarly articles on the broad area of Dalit studies, he has 3 books to his credit: Life in the Fringes, The Aborigines in Patrick White's Boss, Riders in the Chariot, and a Fringe of Leaves; Caste, Reality, and Medication, Articulation of Dalit Experience in Vasudev Sunani's Select Writings; Towards Dalit Historiography, Imaging the Gondas through Various Narratives. Over to you, Professor Mahananda.
Thank you so much, Sumadhura. I must actually congratulate, along with all others, to our dear friend Prabhakar. And also congratulations to the publisher, the People's Publication, Vivek ji, Vidya Bhushan ji, what's the name? Vidya ji, Vidya Bhushan ji, and all my co-contributors to this, this very wonderful piece of kind of text. Whatever, in fact, the topic that has been given to me is that is significance of the book, Reading the Margins. In fact, Professor Rajkumar has already said it in so many words, and all of us know the significance, the journey, the significance, and the kind of situation that is. And the book, in fact, Prabhakar has also given the outlines almost, and the because you know, since all of us know the content itself, the range that it has, you know. So considering the range and the contemporaneity, you know, the very relevance of this time, you know, it is of course significant. There is no two way about it. So when I say this, I think I shouldn't be repeating again when I go in order to go to the chapters, each and every one. But I should be making a few, maybe a couple of points related to the margin study. Why margin study itself is important. So, because this book is going to be that substantial intervention in the realm of margin study, so that's how this will automatically be the significance of the book. So that's how why we do need to have margin study today. In fact, when we talk about marginality, marginalizations, Prabhakar has already given that in the introduction, and GJV sir has also said that in the foreword. And our contributors have also said in so many words. But there, and then taking a small cue from Professor Patrick Danaher. So, although originally this book is intended for India, this book also has some relevance at the world stage. Why I say that? It has that, it actually resonates with something that I do in my writings from the margin class, because I have been, since last 4 years, I have been teaching writings from the margin in my MA. So as part of our optional paper, CVC paper. So there I try to see these things. And one of the significant texts that I always refer to is Moving the Center by none other than Ngungia Thiong'o. So published in 1993. So when Prabhakar has already said this thing earlier in the introduction also, there Professor Rajkumar has also said this, because there is this binary of center and the margin. The margin can never be understood without the understanding the center. And what is the nature of the center? Of course, as Professor Rajkumar was saying, the center, the nature of the center is always power. And Foucault has already said it, and so many other writers have done it. So there, when Ngungia Thiong'o was writing that thing, Moving the Center, in fact, the very title of that book was Moving the Center, the Struggle for Cultural Freedoms. The title of the book was Moving the Center, the Struggle for Cultural Freedoms. In that, the very first chapter was Moving the Center towards a pluralism of cultures. That is one of the significant things that actually. So while he was doing it, why I'm referring this thing, things will be clear quite now. Why I'm referring this thing? Because when all of us know in post-colonial studies what is the significance of Ngungia Thiong'o's writing of decolonization of mind, and this one, how he talks about going away from Eurocentric vision of the history, Eurocentric society, everything. Throughout the globe, we actually refer to that in post-colonial studies. So when we have that, when Ngungia Thiong'o writes about African literature, African situation, and then theorizes about the center and the margin, and then talks about the plurality or pluralism of culture, an effort towards pluralism of culture. Similarly, this book is also going to, although it is basically rooted in Dalit and tribal and Indian scenario, it is also going to have that kind of theorization. This is not just my what I say bragging, because I'm one of the contributors, but this is my conviction. This book, the kind of range that it has, we have Dalit, we have tribal, we have subaltern, we have women's studies, we have gender studies, we have minority studies, what not, and all of them have been thoroughly argued with proper theorization, with grounding in the facts, local facts, the detailed, the minute details, and the nuances, as in fact in Patrick Danaher's writing also says that the nuances, the binary, they are not just concerned only about the binaries. They are also looking into the different aspects of the binary, the ambivalence of the binaries. So that's how this book is going to be very significant. So that's how, I won't take much time. I think there are lined up other discussions, maybe while in the course of discussion, many things might come up. So this is, if one has to ask, what is the most significant thing about this particular book? Of course, this is the range and the kind of rootedness in that, both theory and praxis, as my predecessors have already said it here. So thank you, Prabhakar. Thank you, GJV sir. Thank you, Rajkumarji, and the publishers, Vivekji. Thank you so much. And congratulations to each other. And I think congratulations to the society, the scholars also who would be reading it.
Thank you so much, Mahananda sir. Thank you for your insightful words. We are privileged to have Mr. V.B. Rawat as our moderator for the session today, a political commentator, human rights defender, and a humanist. He has been engaged in public discourses on vital human rights issues, particularly related to caste discrimination, religious intolerance, untouchability, and minority rights issues for the past 25 years. He has authored over 15 books and made an equal number of documentaries which are available on YouTube. He was awarded the Ambedkar International Award 2016 for his services to strengthen the Ambedkarite movement in India by Ambedkar Association of North America. He was also awarded Distinguished Services to Humanism Award 2011 by International Humanist and Ethical Union, London, at its conference in Oslo. A dissenter among dissenters, wanderer and nature lover, a humanist with deep faith in social justice. I invite Mr. Roberts to take over the session and initiate the book discussion with the authors.
Thank you very much, and I want to congratulate all of you for this wonderful book. I just got a PDF copy the day before, and I glanced through it, and I can say that I like the content in it, because most of the time, whenever we are discussing issues of margin, we only discuss, few individuals. Obviously, we have been discussing Dr. Ambedkar, Phule, Peria, but it's very rare that, when you find discourses from the ground and from the well-researched work, and that I want to congratulate, because some of the chapters are really, really good. I've been with Vivek, we have a YouTube channel called Lokayata. And through Lokayata, I have engaged with a large number of Ambedkarites, those people who work with Dr. Ambedkar. And apart from them, also Periyarist and human rights defenders, we have been able to, had a wide-ranging conversation with them. But in the last 6 months during this pandemic, I also opened up the discussion with a number of the African American and people in Kenya, in South Africa, and Senegal. And some of those things are so interesting, actually. When I was just going through the chapter on Australia, and I felt that it is very, very important for even the Dalit right activists here to know about, the whole history of colonization. Because colonization, sometimes many people in our country or maybe from our side of the world feel that it was good. They came, for the benefit of the Dalits. So it is not true. We might have got some benefit out of their work in collateral benefit, but they have not come here to benefit the Dalits or the marginalized. And that's how the colonized worked everywhere, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in Australia or Canada or New Zealand. Because as Patrick has written so wonderfully, because if you read those history, how the indigenous people have been suppressed and the culture has been annihilated. So it has to be seen that colonization has never been a great thing, which, people try to define. And that was the reason why I, last year, when this issue, we all discuss about history in India, how history and historiography has been used by the dominant. And I came through a book, which last year my book was named as Role and Rise and Role of the Marginalized in India's Freedom Movement, because it is where sometime Ambedkar tried to dissociate with the freedom movement, and it's wrong, because even in the Congress Party movement led by Gandhi, the largest number of people who died and who contributed were the Dalits, the Adivasis, and you cannot deny those histories of Birsa Munda or Sidhu Kanu. I went to Sidhu Kanu's place in Jharkhand, and I know that if any upper caste who had done that much of work would have been given a kind of a Bharat Ratna or a bigger space in India's history. But the role of the Dalits and the marginalized Adivasis particularly have been sidelined. In fact, when we call that, 1857, as India's, freedom, call, the revolt against the British is wrong. Because not before that, rebellion had happened in Adivasi areas in both Odisha and Jharkhand. So these are the things, because we have confined all those rebellions and revolt of the Adivasis as the Adivasi revolt. All the issues of Phule and Ambedkar and Periyar, all those who raised, have been made as social issues and have never been part of our history books. So history books are basically the Congress Party or those a few others, and they rarely represented what you have done. Some of you have written about the oral history, and this is so important today. A large part of the Adivasi Dalit history, we have to trace. We have to go to the people in their songs, in their narratives, because the Brahminical system in India worked through narratives. And this is how I call the narratives of the dominant. How as the Westerners is, when Columbus, looted, the Caribbeans, we called it, Columbus discovered America. When Vasco da Gama came to India to virtually, exploit us, we said that he explored. So this is how the definitions are. So Columbus or Vasco da Gama or others became explorer and the nice gentlemen. But if you read their history, they destroyed the local culture, the indigenous people. So that is how the narratives work. And that is how in India, these narratives are called Brahminical narratives, much more crooked than the Western vital narratives, actually. So I would definitely love to hear actually more from the authors because, you are here and some of you have worked on, I love that story of focalization of Ramayana and Odisha, or even from Dr. Prabhakar. It will be good to hear about, the issue of Dalits in Odisha, because it's important where Adivasis are so in large number also, and Dalits are also in the large number. They remain on margin. And who is dominant in Odisha is a caste called Patnaiks. So even if an opposition come to power, it is a Patnaik. If a Congress come to power, it's Patnaik. If BJP bring a Patnaik, the Communist will bring a Patnaik. So why is this? This is a tiny community dominate the whole thing. And this has to be seen in this whole, how Odisha, once upon a time, a Buddhist state, a Buddhist place where Buddhism has been totally annihilated. So it will be good also, like Sumadhura, her chapter I liked on Rajavansis. Why I am saying these things, because in the most of the time when we discuss about Dalits, we have only a few communities when we discuss, and there are a large number of communities in India. And the role of Rajavansis is important, because I traveled to Bangladesh. I know many of them. I know Rajavansis were the people who voted along with Namashudras to bring Dr. Ambedkar to the Constituent Assembly. So this many people don't know. These are the facts that people say, some Muslim League brought to Dr. Ambedkar, and it is wrong. Dr. Ambedkar was brought to Constituent Assembly by the Dalits, and all Dalits, including even the Congress Party Dalits, voted to him that time, because there were the few seats, 7, 8 seats, and how they felt it was important to bring him to the Constituent Assembly from Bengal. So these are the things which should come. I would definitely love to, because we have very little time here, and I want Sumadhura also to speak, and Dr. Prabhakar and other friends who have contributed, at least whatever little they can share, because this is a very good work and it should reach more people. And I hope more and more scholars will, learn from this, and they will also go to the ground level where they can, stay some places, write some stories, and, how the Brahminical narratives have killed. And still, if you see the historical legacy of Bahujan movement, whether it's Periyar or Phule or Ambedkar, you see they survived a whole onslaught of Brahminism, and it is growing. It is more powerful. The Bahujan literature in India is far superior to the Brahminical literature. Brahminical literature doesn't actually come close anywhere in terms of rights, in terms of humanity, in terms of humanism. If you go through that, and I'm sure that more and more academics now will take that, because you need to go to that and see whether we can bring those stories from the ground, from the local languages to the mainstream or to the so-called English language. Because it is unfortunately truth that there are many people who have been writing so wonderfully in local languages, and people don't know about them. So that's also our duty to reach to the people. And if we can reach them, like I tried my best in the last 10, 20 years, reaching people in different parts of the world, even in India, in Bengal, I reached many people who are like, because I have an interest in Bengal, Odisha, Jharkhand, where this subaltern movements, what people call subaltern, I'll call the people's movement, because it is the Adivasi rights movement or Dalit rights movement. So that's all there. And I'm sure that this work that you have done will pave way for many other people. They will look forward to this as a model. So I congratulate you, and I would like now other friends to please speak about their work and about the book. So Sumadhura, you can, because you have been you started with this, so better I speak to you only. What have you found in your work on Rajbansis in Bengal?
Thank you, sir, for your question. Yes, like you mentioned in your address, that the problem with the Rajbangshi literature is that not much of it has been written about, or we do not talk about it. That is also, I think, because like when I was doing my research, what I found is there is this feeling within the Rajbangshi community also of being excluded from the dominant, Dalit literature and Dalit narratives which are in circulation in the public discourse. That the Dalit narrative does not really take into account the Rajbangshis to be part of the Dalit movement. And I think this has also to do because within the Rajbangshi community, like because of the several kind of marginalizations which they have faced, there have been different ways in which they have tried to assert their identity. So first of all, it was through under the leadership of Thakur Panchanan Burma. There was this entire movement of, through a ritualistic initiation into Kshatriyahood, where they claimed that they are not really lower castes, that they have been clubbed with the lower castes because of this process of standardization and Sanskritization which has happened. So they claimed to be Kshatriyas. But then again, there was a lack of refusal of acceptance in society as the Kshatriya. Yes, so first there was this entire assertion of the caste identity, but there was lack of acceptance. So then it shifted to linguistic and cultural identity. And at this stage, we are also fighting, if you look at the Rajbangshi community, they're fighting for linguistic autonomy, they're fighting for cultural autonomy. And of course, there was this entire, in the earlier times, towards the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, there was this entire movement for calling for a separate statehood of the Rajbangshis. So there have been different, if you look at the dominant Dalit movements, the movements of the Rajbangshis have taken a different turn from the dominant, movements within Dalit community. So I think, and it is, I'm actually very glad that I could present this paper here, and now it is part of this book. So then we can actually see, even within the marginal communities, we are talking about marginalized identities, but still there are differences. And I think it's important to acknowledge these differences and see how each community takes its own course of history, and to write those histories and talk about those histories. So yes, I will not take much time. I think I will ask all the other authors to proceed. And just a gentle reminder that because we are running out of time, maybe we all take 2 to 3 minutes to speak quickly, in very brief, about our work. Yes, please.
Vidyaji, you are mute.
Mr. Pradyumna, can you speak about Odisha? Because your chapter is on Dalit identity and as in Odisha. So,
yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this beautiful book discussion and bringing out this book altogether. When the issue of margin, apparently this book itself is a witness to the fact that the margin is trying to make headway to the center. So either the writers or publisher or publications or authors or content itself, all of it in a way indicate that fact, witness, underline that fact. So being a student of sociology, often when we study about caste, there are few features of caste we often narrate that to students, which are almost like universally replicated, though it may not be necessarily scientific. We say that this is scientific discipline, but the narrative and the features of caste when defined, it both goes contradictory to each other. So I try to understand that how in case of the content or the publisher, often different, if a content is written by some well-known scholar and get published from a very famous publishing house, the content, whatever the content it may be, it automatically kind of become very popular. But I really love about this project and the book is that it's not very well known. Forgive me for saying this, that the publisher is not very well known in the publishing world. And also the contents are, mixture of many things. And I'm proud and I'm happy that we are bringing in not only about the content or author, but also altogether every aspect of it, trying to make headway to the center. So there is an important dimension, because the authors also monopolize, the publisher also monopolize that which content can get into the center and which cannot. So in that way, so they have the priority, they have the prerogative to exclude. So unless we have this competition, unless we have this publisher who give priority to content like this, other likes us, so we also make point. And thank you, sir. As you talk about Orissa, there are multi-layers of exclusion that takes place. And this one thing that I try to look at through the article is that, how this exclusion and marginalization is habitually reproduced in everyday life. So in many small things that is reproduced. So I talked about the language of the Dom, which is one of the most marginalized language. And often when we go to school and by mistake, even in a Freudian sleep, we just say some words that become an offense and that become sometimes invite punishment from the teacher or school authority, that why do you utter that word? But that word is part of me. That is an important constitutive of my identity. It is ingrained in me. I simply cannot do away with it. So in that way, but the moment I say something that invite punishment, that invite humiliation. What I try to do is that despite all this, we feel proud of being Oriya and we celebrated Oriya identity. But when you go to Orissa, this Oriya identity only again marginalizes. So this linguistic identity have its own kind of dynamic. If I go to Jagannath temple, it is only I am an Oriya, but the Jagannath temple only, they are also Oriya, but they will not let me in if they know that I am, I'm a Dalit. So these multi-layers of, this exclusion and inclusion we can look at through, I pick up a very small day-to-day instance of language and try to look at that how this inbuilt system, sometimes we appropriate the ideology of the ruling class without realizing that it is acting against us. So I celebrate, let's say if I celebrate Utkal Divas and Oriya Divas, then equally I'm accepting my marginality. So that is one point I'm trying to make through this article, that, one should be conscious of this fact that when I am celebrating my marginality and accepting my subordination. So I think thank you. I hope there are many speakers, so I will finish it. If there are any question, I would love to answer.
So I can now request Mr. Pankaj Rakhera, because the issue he has raised is also important, of the marginalization of the disability further. So Pankaj ji, can you share your thoughts?
In this paper, actually, I tried to highlight the some of the issues related to persons with disability, and I have contextualized them in keeping in mind the process of globalization. Actually, you see, the marginalization of the PWDs or the persons with disabilities is not a new phenomenon. It has been there for centuries. But if we take into consideration the pre-globalization era in the context of India, we would find that in the pre-globalization period, public sector was having a larger share of the economy, and it was the sector with which was dominating the economy with commanding heights, and the provision of reservation was there since 1977. So that was the time before 1990 when PWDs were getting more and more government employment, more and more public employment. And why I have raised this issue is because, you see, I have myself been a part of the disability movement. I have participated in the rallies and the mass agitation for getting the reservation, and I have myself seen the changes which have taken place after the commencement of the policy of globalization. So in this era of globalization, you see, all provisions are there. The Act of 1997 is there, the 1995 is there, the Disability RPD Act of 2016 is there, but how it is going to help the persons with disability, it's a big question, because you see, the public employment is going down day by day, and people are moving from public to private sector. So that is leading to the marginalization of the persons with disability. And you see, globalization is the age of cutthroat competition for the sake of employment, for the sake of business, and for the sake of this and that. So how can we make, you see, it a sort of balance between the policies of globalization on one hand, because globalization involves acute competition. It demands a very high level of efficiency and so on. But on the other hand, we have to protect the interests of the marginalized sections of the societies, including the PWD. So this is a big question, and in my paper, I have tried my best to highlight the issues related to the process of globalization and their impact upon the PWDs, particularly the employment of persons with disabilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think it's important, like in the current situation, but hope at some point of time we all have time to discuss those things, where with the so-called globalization, there is a more and more rapid privatization. And as you know, the so-called economic education policy has come out in India, whether it is a death knell for academia or it's going to give more space for our marginalized, is an open challenge. But the way things are being systematically attacked, the way the rights of the marginalized are systematically attacked, that is a very clear way, the direction the wind is blowing. And I think we should discuss that issue in threadbare in a certain point of time. So any other friends, please, because we have only now about 5 to 7 minutes. So I would request.
Yeah. Can I come in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm here, Rajesh. Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Rajesh, please. Yeah.
See, Dr. Rawat mentioned about, Santhal. So I was just, reminded of Santhal, texts and folk tales and all. And in fact, I got a chance to do some research work. Yeah. And very recently I published a book also, which was on Santhal folk dance songs. Okay. So no, my point of view, I would like to explain my point of view with just a Santhal folktale which I remember, because it could be, you can say, I think very effective also. And it goes like this, you can say, once upon a time, there were a tiger and a hunter in a forest, you can say. And one day the hunter saw the tiger and started talking to each other. So while interacting, you can say they both, you can say, start liking each other. And after a few days, the hunter, invited the tiger for lunch. And tiger responded very positively. And according to the schedule, you can say, he reached the hunter's, you can say, hut. And after entering, the hunter saw a painting hanging on the wall of the hut. And the painting depicted that the dead tiger was lying under the feet of an armed hunter. And after seeing the picture, the tiger became very, very curious and asked the hunter about the person portrayed in that image. And the hunter very proudly said it was his grandpa who was a great hunter, and claimed that the picture was proof of this achievement. Tiger then asked, "And who's the painter?" The hunter replied, "My father, who was not only a successful hunter, but also a good painter." And tiger then smiled and commented, "Instead of a human, if a tiger painted it, the picture would be a different one." So the point which I want to make is this, that the hegemonic forces have always tried to propagate or establish, you can say, an image of their superiority, you can say, and also authority to serve their purposes and interests, you can say. And in this process, you can say, they have very invariably delegitimized, you can say, marginalized people, you can say, degraded the others, their existence also, you can say, okay. So therefore, we need to understand that, this binary is a binary between center and the margin, you can say, and it is dependent upon a kind of a powerful regulatory mechanism, okay, a normative framework, you can say, okay. I mean, a space, you can say, space is not a blank for anybody to go and occupy it, you can say. Political space, you can say, what happened in this, you can say, it's not a place, you can say. There are some bodies who are deemed as having the right to belong, while others are marked out as trespassers, you can say, who are, you can say, also circumscribed as being out of place, you can say. So the point is that political space is not neutral. It is underpinned by a very, very powerful hegemonic normative framework, which really circumscribes, you can say, who can speak, what can speak, you can say. It also, you can say, constructs the persons also, you can say. So now looking into that, you can say, I mean, my paper is essentially kind of theoretical, but I have incorporated, you can say, a few, you can say, writings done in the field of Dalits also and Aborigines also. So it's sort of a comparative work also. And I published a book also, Dalit versus Aboriginal Australians, you can say, because that was part of my PhD thesis, you can say. So if anybody's interested, you can go for that. So my paper is basically a theoretical paper. And, let me point out, let me make one point when I'm talking about, Dalits and Aborigines, in Australia. Though India and Australia are considered to be, you can say, post-colonial nations, you can say, we got to problematize the kind of cultural diversities, you can say, which is being promoted in both countries, you can say. People simply generalize, particularly, the whole notion of, you can say, post-colonialism is very, very questionable, you can say. It raises a lot of questions, you can say, because, there is a general consensus that post-colonialism means, you can say, that we have to talk about colonizer and the colonized. I mean, come on, we have to come out of this. We got to move out of it, you can say, and talk about other aspects of post-colonialism which are affecting our society, culture, you can say, many things, you can say. And, while talking about Australia, I see multiculturalism, people talk about that white people, they have, sort of, you can say, written against, you can say, Britishers, you can say, but they're forgetting, they're not realizing also the fact that there have been, you can say, a number of, you can say, rules through which they have tried to push the Aborigines to the margin, Aborigines to the background, you can say. And when it comes to, for instance, let me give you an example, you can say, when it comes to like publishing things, we can say.
Dr. Rajesh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. So,
I'm
okay.
really sorry, just if you could.
All right. All right.
quickly wrap
So
up.
the
But yes,
idea is
please.
that, you know, I mean, there has been, you can say, tendency to marginalize these people. In Australia, we have Aborigines. In Dalits, here you all know that. I think I'm exceeding time, so I would stop here only. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Samudraji. You can now take over and put a vote of thanks because it's quite late. Some people have to leave. So
Can we have just maybe at least 2 minutes each?
Yeah.
Grace, and then Aching Liu is there. Robert, Robert. Three.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll just cut. Yeah, so my paper has been about my community's church and the women's wing of that church. It's a Baptist church, and nothing could be more ironical that I'm writing this, that I have written this paper, which is supposed to be part of my part of the larger thesis that I'm writing for my PhD, is that I have to do this, on the sly. This is the status of women when it comes to religious matters, the dogmatic patriarchal hierarchy that we cannot contest. And that is one of the concerns that I have put across in my paper. And this is such a hot potato, if I can use this word, if I can bring in this colloquialism. It is such a hot potato. It is not supposed to be mentioned because, number one, being a woman, that itself is a state of marginality, right? And when, as a woman, and as a woman who is working, as a woman who's a mother, as a woman who's a daughter, I have had to defend myself as to why I needed to write about this in a public sphere. Why did I need to bring this out? Why did I need to bring this? Why did I need to highlight about this aspect of what is supposedly a deeply spiritual experience? But then, yeah, so immediately then the question of your faith, your spirituality, or the lack of it gets highlighted to the extent where my father, who is generally a very, very progressive thinker, immediately put his foot down and said, "You wrote this? You've already written this? It's already come out? You shouldn't have done that. Unless and until you can bring about a change in the church, or until you can bring about a reformation, as a woman, you shouldn't be doing these things." So that patriarchal conditioning, that hegemonic control, which is what this text is which is what this article is about, is something which I'm also experiencing right now. So I feel that this is not only from an academic perspective, but from a truly experiential point of view, this writing for me has been very cathartic. It has been a very, very cathartic outlet that has been given to me, and I know I have to defend this continuously, throughout, because it is not just a questioning of my academic credentials; it is also a questioning of my spiritual faith. So these are the marginalities within which, the praxis that we are supposed to. That is how it is. That is, yeah, that is it. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yes, I think similar issue is also brought up by Aching Liu. So maybe Aching Liu can take off from where Grace left.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the time. Thank you, Prabhakar, and my co-authors. My paper is on Estherine Carey's novel, A Terrible Matriarchy. This is a novel about a young little girl growing up in Nagaland. Her name is called Leno, who is 5, and she is sent off to be raised by her grandmother. So from the very beginning, she can sense that her grandmother does not like her, and that her brother called Bully, not the bully, but bully in the language here, the brother, he was treated better than Leno, and the old woman doesn't like to think that girls need an education. Or love or time to play. And so the story is about a tale of a girl growing up in a strict traditional society in a conflict-ridden area who refuses to be defeated. And in the end, like the quintessential Naga woman, she quietly went ahead and she got the education. And by getting education, she had better her future, and she was able to help her parents and even the brothers more than the brothers helping the parents. And so here, Nagas writing in English literature, it's like from the periphery. And I would like to say that Northeastern English literature is like the backyard literature. It's not like the royal roses. It's grown at the backyard, but yet it has the possibilities of giving awareness to the sensibilities of the readership. And so here, I felt that women, especially not only women, the young people, they are required to remain silent when the elders are speaking. And there's no opportunity for the women to even talk in the midst of the elders, especially the male. So writing is taken as a form of activism. And so I feel that it is very effective. Esther Nkere had done that. And so I feel that by taking that forward, it will be a good opportunity for the women to voice themselves, to find a space where they can work, where there is no threat to their voices being cut off. And so like Nadine Gordimer has said, I would like to quote her, one's unique contribution to social change can be through writing. And so I had taken this opportunity to present the paper on this one. And thank you so much for giving me the space to be published also. Thank you.
I think we have one more author present here, Robert, yeah, why don't you share about your contribution to the book?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prabhakar, and it's a wonderful work to rewrite the Dalit history. My paper basically talks about how these tribal and Dalit communities are oppressed or marginalized in different ways, both socially, politically, economically, in the pre-British period and even in the post-British period. So I just start with what Biswa Mepati says. The way the oppressed invented the survival strategies when their very livelihood was being challenged. So what Bidyaji also highlighted, even their very participation in the freedom fight was really sidelined. They were not given the status that they had to be given. So they protruded it as rebellion instead of it's a movement, and their participation as a contribution to the nation building. So they are being sidelined in various ways. So that's they called it as rebellion. So, and also the policies, different policies in the pre-British period, and that continued in the post-British period. It really confiscated the traditional political system. Not only their culture, their identity, and their effort, their struggle, their livelihood, but also their traditional political system also being confiscated. So just I wanted to highlight on that how these tribal movements, whether it is the Kans movement or the Koyas movement, there are different tribes in Odisha, and their movements, the tribal movements, though they have substantially contributed in the freedom struggle, they are being considered or portrayed as the revolt or the criminals, or they're committing some kind of crime. So never they have been identified as someone who is in the very center of the movement or center of a national building. Even how they are being they were so much in a state that they are being utilized for their benefit. Even the very policies of government in the pre-British period governments, even the forest rights or whatever land rights that has been introduced, all went against the tribals. So that really snatched to their very the community spirit, their administrative rights, the economic position in the society. So, and also I just wanted to highlight that how this value system was being regained with the introduction of the Western education. With the introduction of Western education through the missionaries, they are able to they're able to understand. They could understand the cause of the various problems. So as education entered into them, the very the way they were being oppressed was they understood the problems and started fighting for their rights. So whether in the pre-British period, and that same thing is continuing in the post-British period too, they are still continuously marginalized. So that is all I just wanted to highlight in my paper.
Thank you so much to all our dear authors, and thank you, Sir Rawat sir, for moderating this session. This was a very engaging session for all of us. I think after the engaging discussion we have had, I think it's mostly clear to everyone what the book is talking about. We hope we'll get good feedback and more comments once people finish reading the book. So this brings us to the end of the session. And with gratitude, I take this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of, Pradyuman sir, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make small point. Often what happens is that even in our reading list or syllabus, we do not mention our own authors. So there is one thing I feel that, you know, the marginals remain marginal even in syllabus. So some of this content, I strongly felt last time we introduced a paper called Indian Social Thinkers, and you know, I don't want to go detail into that, but what happened is that the publisher, then the authors and the literature, only the mainstream people and those celebrated authors are always, you know, repeatedly they are taught and, you know, kind of given enough of space. Even that becomes a commonsensical knowledge, it keeps appearing and reappearing. So this is a small request that we should also, in a way, encourage people to, or in a way practice that we incorporate this in our reading list and all that, so people get to read. I read the book, it is really, really interesting. I haven't read something, being a student of sociology also, on the margin and periphery and center. So this is a very new thing I feel like, and students should get a chance to read it. Thank you for, sorry for interrupting you, but that's important.
Pradyumna, the whole effort of People's Literature Publication has been to go beyond the bestsellers. I mean, the tagline was read beyond bestsellers. That's the whole idea that I'm trying to do. I hope with your support and everybody's support, I can publish more literature on these lines. So thanks a lot for everyone.
Thank you, Pradyuman sir. I think that was a very important intervention, and it is a good space to put that idea forward. Yes, so now I take the opportunity to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of all my fellow authors and the editor. To begin with, I would like to thank Professor Danaher for taking time out of his busy schedule to be with us today and officially release the book. I would like to thank our speakers, Professor Rajkumar and Professor Mahananda, for sharing their thoughts on the book and the important issues surrounding the concept of marginality. My sincere thanks to our moderator for the evening, Mr. V.B. Rawat, for engaging the authors and the participants in a thought-provoking discussion. Our sincere gratitude to our editor, Dr. Prabhakar Palka, for organizing the conference in 2017 and furthermore working towards compiling, editing, publishing the conference proceedings in the form of this wonderful book, Reading the Margins, History, Culture, and Literature. Your motivation, encouragement, and perseverance needs a special mention here, sir.
Thank you.
Our sincere thanks to Professor D.J.B. Prasad for writing the foreword to this book and for his constant support and encouragement.